You want me to sit this side?
Yeah, why don't you sit there?
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon to all of you. I'm Ashley Tellis, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and it is really a great delight to welcome all of you to the endowment this afternoon for what we've billed as a conversation with Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu, India's ambassador to the United States. For those of you who followed the twists and turns in U.S. India relations over the last 20 to 25 years, Ambassador Sandhu is not a name that would have escaped you. He is one of India's senior most diplomats and has actually been working in U.S. India relations for a lot longer than just his ambassadorship. He came as India's ambassador to Washington in February 2020, just when we were on the cusp of a terrible meltdown because of the pandemic. But he's actually served in the United States thrice before, twice at the embassy here in Washington, and once at the Indian mission to the United Nations. So he certainly knows the United States well enough. And I think it's wonderful that he is now India's ambassador to the United States, where he has the opportunity to shepherd the relationship at the highest levels. But he's not just simply someone who's familiar with the United States. He has a very wide span of experience. He served as India's ambassador to Sri Lanka. And for those of us, High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, I should correct myself. And for those of us who follow Indian foreign policy, you appreciate intuitively the importance of the neighborhood to India's interests. So he has Sri Lanka under his belt. He's had experience in Europe, having served in Germany. And because of current circumstances, I should flag that he was also responsible for opening India's embassy to Kyiv after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Ukraine became an independent country. And he's, of course, served in the Ministry of External Affairs at headquarters in various capacities. So I'm delighted to welcome Taranjit to the Carnegie Endowment. But I must admit a certain sense of regret that we've had this conversation, or we're going to have this conversation, fairly late in his tenure, because the last 2 years, for reasons that are obvious to all of us, did not give us the opportunity to welcome him in person in this building. I still hope that this will not be the last time we will see him in this building. But without further ado, I do want to welcome you, Taranjit, to the floor to say a few words, after which I will proceed to interrogate you on the course of U.S.-India relations. So thank you all very much for coming.
Ashley, firstly, I'm delighted to be here. You and I go a long way back, and we have actually seen, in a sense, evolution of what I would say is the modern India-US partnership, especially in the last 2 decades, and in different roles. Secondly, I want to compliment you on the scholarship on India, which you have built here at Carnegie. The South Asia program, and more recently, the Indian Ocean Initiative. The generation of scholars you have nurtured on India is indeed remarkable. I would like to reflect on some of the significant moments in history which I have witnessed. As a young congressional officer in 1997, I remember doing the rounds of the capital to explain India's perspective when India was under sanctions due to the nuclear tests. Just to put you in perspective of where people were, Gregory Meeks, Sherman were freshmen then, and Nancy Pelosi was the ranking member of Foreign Ops. And of course, President Biden was the chair of Senate Foreign Relations Committee then. You know, that experience made me appreciate the value of continuous outreach, tough conversations in cementing this relationship. It also made me appreciate how, as democracies, both India and United States had the ability to talk through any issue. I remember from the sidelines the Jaswant Singh Straub Talbot conversations, opening it provided to overcome a difficult phase in the history of our relationship. And I cannot miss mentioning to you all here, since most of you have seen the Indian diplomacy over years, actually waiting for Straub Talbot to come. And we were all in bungalows, including then Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission, Jaswant Singh. And we see Talbot coming in a convertible in shorts. He was taking him to his home for a stakeout. So that's where this relationship had started. President Clinton's visit in 2000 was historic. He went to different cities, really connected with people of India. You know, the images were all over. It also laid the foundation for developing a bilateral partnership on its own footing. Incidentally, many of the interlocutors of those days are still around in Washington, D.C., of course, in senior positions today. Of course, the real game changer for our strategic partnership was the India-US nuclear deal. And you know better from the role you played, Ashley, in how the thinking about the relationship has changed since. I would say that there was been no looking back. President George W.'s prioritized India in a way hadn't happened before. I was back here again in my second avatar as Deputy Chief of Mission in 2013. Within months of my arrival came a big challenge in form of the diplomatic crisis. And through painstaking diplomacy, again some tough conversations, we overcame that. And here I see amongst us Seema sitting here. And I recall perhaps the evening of that crisis, we had a chat. In 2014, we had the historic visit of Prime Minister Modi. The reception he received in Madison Square Garden and in Washington, D.C. are still fresh in my memory. This was followed by his visit to the Silicon Valley in 2015, his address to the U.S. Congress in 2016. Prime Minister Modi also received President Obama in 2015 when President became the first US president to attend Republic Day ceremony as a chief guest. You would agree with me that these days, perhaps the most oft-quoted phrase in our strategic discourse is Indo-Pacific. It actually started taking concrete form with the joint strategic vision on Asia-Pacific and Indian Ocean region, announced during the visit of President Obama to India in 2015. So Obama's visit to India was significant in more ways than one. When I just arrived here as ambassador in early 20, we had the visit of President Trump to India in February. And then, of course, pandemic struck and our lives change forever. One of our ministers the other day spoke about the sunrise moment in our bilateral relations. Sunrise is beautiful, it is promising, and brings with it a lot of positive energy. We are in such a moment in our bilateral partnership. However, if we are complacent, that moment is going to pass. It will not wait for us. We need to seize the moment. A lot has happened undoubtedly. I have 2 points to make here. First, our strategic partnership has deepened. Second, our overall bilateral partnership has broadened. There is a renewed momentum in our bilateral ties. If I ask my team to tell me the number of times President Biden and Prime Minister Modi have met in person or virtually, they hold up their hands. Same is the case with EM and Secretary Blinken and other ministers too. This is precisely how things are between friends. These continuous high-level political engagements signal bipartisan support on both sides for deepening the India-US partnership. The deepening of strategic and defense ties on bilateral front has been significant. Signing of all foundational agreements on defense. For the first time, a US ship was repaired in an Indian shipyard. An Indian ship visited the US port in August, and which itself was a historical first. Of course, we'll discuss some of these in our question and answers. We are also actively joining hands in some of the plurilateral platforms. Of course, the Quad has taken off in a big way. And I want to underline here that we are going beyond the G2G format. For example, the Quad Investors Network has been announced. As you know, India has become a member of US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. We are also working closely on I2U2. Ashley, you have written about new plurilateral arrangements that we should be looking at. And this brings me to my second point, that there are new domains of partnership. So the widening of baskets, so to speak, health, energy, tech, space, education, etc., etc. These developments are significant. You know, NASA and ISRO are working on interesting stuff such as heliophysics, human space flight program, NISAR, the radar, which will help us to monitor better the implications of climate change. We are closely working on counter-ransomware, cyber security, advanced telecommunications, 5G, URAN, etc. We have announced a new initiative for critical emerging technologies. We have resolved decades-old market access issues of some agricultural products. You are all well aware of the COVID vaccine partnership, so I will not repeat it. Notwithstanding all the debates about India's energy imports, India-US energy partnership is thriving and touching new areas such as green hydrogen. After the announcement of new education policy, we are looking at new ways of collaboration between Indian and US universities. We just launched the India-US Economic Forum yesterday. Secretary Yellen is currently in Delhi for the Economic and Financial Partnership Dialogue. So take any sector, we have a new story to tell. And by the way, do not be under the impression that it's only the governments that are working hard. Industry, intelligentsia, think tanks, academia, all of you are working hard too. In fact, as I always say, You set the agenda of expectations. We as government try to implement them. We are judged by how quickly and effectively we implement them. Here is a relationship which is people-driven and people-centric. The Indian American diaspora in the United States, the Indian students in the US, both have been great enablers. My idea was to give you a flavor of this relationship. I'm sure we'll go into detail subsequently. Do all these mean that India-US relationship is without challenges? I told you about the episodes that I have been witness to over the last 25 years. It was one of the founding fathers of the United States, the scientist, diplomat, philosopher, writer, Benjamin Franklin, who said, "Write your injuries in dust, benefits in marble." We need to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. That was a wonderful horizon that conveyed both the depth of the relationship and how far we've come since you were last posted in Washington. The elections of just a couple of days ago have reminded us that even as the bilateral relationship has been transformed, the United States itself is undergoing its own domestic transformations. And so the question I wanted to put to you is, have you seen any impact of the domestic changes in the United States on the bilateral relationship? And then I want to draw you out on that a little more to explore the potentialities for the future.
So Ashley, I think domestic polity and economy always has an influence on the foreign relations of any country, of an approach. But one of the reasons I gave a little extended opening and I traveled with you through the time, especially as I said in the modern stage, President Clinton, then we had President George W., President Obama, President Trump, and perhaps next year we should have President Biden too. I think, and this reflects on the administration side, that we have had strong building up of the bipartisan support for this relationship. And I would also say this is also reflected in the other organizations or parts of the government of the United States, particularly in the US Congress. And having worked closely in the US Congress, I must say that the US Congress did play a pioneering role in creating this bipartisan appreciation of this relationship. So I think elections come and go, and they should in any democratic polity, and both United States and India are very robust democratic polities, to say the least. And elections always come out with, and I think that's the strength of democracy, the strength of an individual to vote, and through the ballot, he can express himself. But coming back to your main question, that has there been impact on our relationship? I think even in the recent time, in the very recent changeover, you can see that there has been bipartisan support for India. And if I may just draw you in very recent past, look at during the COVID, you saw bipartisan resolutions coming, even before when we had some issues on the border. And one area I can mention to you that the Texas delegation came together to write a joint letter on Corbavax to President Biden, underlying that it's important for United States and India to partner and ensure that this joint product can be given out to many countries in Africa, Latin America, etc., etc. So I would say that certainly there is this support. To your last, the second part, I would say, I think the most important aspect actually is that the relationship is much wider and deeper. And therefore, we do need to have and keep in mind the bigger picture. Definitely there'll be issues, definitely there'll be discussions, there'll be disagreements. But as I said, something which I learned here and something which holds so true even today, that we can actually, as two democratic people, sit across and discuss even our differences.
Absolutely. One of our ambitions early on in the Bush administration was to construct a partnership with India that would survive all the vicissitudes in US politics. Because if you remember, President Bush in his time was also a controversial figure because of the wars in Iraq and so on and so forth. And yet, to our great benefit, when we had the civil nuclear agreement, we were able to get both sides of the political spectrum to come behind this initiative, which was very controversial when it was first announced. So to the degree that we've actually succeeded in immunizing the bilateral relationship from the challenges at home, that's only good news. Let me flip the gaze, if I may, for a minute. Where is the Indian debate about the United States? I remember at the time of President Clinton's visit, and even thereafter, there were still bodies of opinion in India that were somewhat suspicious about what this partnership was about. And you saw during the civil nuclear agreement, a government of India almost paralyzed by deep divides within Indian politics about the United States. Is that era completely behind us?
Luckily, during that phase, Ashley, you were in business and I was somewhere else. I say. But I think, let me throw a very interesting fact. And it's not that, I'm deliberately doing it, but it's a fact. United States has not sunk billions of dollars in India. But any US president goes to India, you will have thousands of young coming out to greet him. And we have seen it over. Sure. There is, in our neighborhood, where you have sunk billions of dollars. I don't have to say anything more.
Yes, there are a few countries that have not been, shall we say, as grateful as they should have been.
But having said that, look, Ashley, we are both democratic polities and there will be viewpoints. But as I said, that it's very important to look at the larger picture. And here, again, let me throw in another facet. We talk all the time about strategic. We know so much of exchange, so much is happening. I'm sure you will touch upon that. Sure. The defense and strategic side so well. But look at another angle. Today we have 200,000 Indian students studying in United States. And 2/3 of them are in STEM areas. They bring value and competitive edge to United States. I'm not talking about 4.5 million Indian Americans who are in different areas, and I don't need to elaborate.
Yes.
So I think that also speaks. And all of these are connected with India. So I think even if in debates and discussions you hear of differing viewpoints, I think at a larger perspective, there is a much more appreciation of United States, just like there is more appreciation of India today.
Yep.
And certainly, I mean, during our discussion, that's why I mentioned to you that there is an element of our relationship which is non-strategic, which certainly needs to be looked into. And I'm sure we'll touch upon that.
I want to actually come back to two of those issues, the non-strategic dimensions, because I think the progress in those areas has been nothing short of spectacular. And I also want to come back to the question of Indians in the United States and also what that means for the future of the global economy, because that is again another profound transformation. But I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about strategic cooperation, because that has been the great success story in ways that people find hard to imagine. You know, when you look at it on a 20-year perspective, that we could be cooperating today in the Quad, that we could be cooperating in the broader Indo-Pacific. These were things that were hard to imagine 20 years ago. So can you give us a flavor for what at the Indian end has driven the impetus to this strategic cooperation? I mean, we know sort of the broad history in defense, where we are doing exercises at an unprecedented scale, where the US has now become a supplier of advanced defense equipment and so on and so forth. But at the Indian end, what is the propelling force? And tell me how far we can go. If you had a chance to craft this, the future of this cooperation, say 5 years or 10 years out, what could we imagine?
Actually, I think I would certainly give full marks to the nuclear deal, especially in creating the trust and the foundation. And I think no one knows it better than you here on what that played in. In fact, in another way, just to draw everyone's attention, that trust which was founded at that time in the current phase, I found during the second phase of COVID, when we were struck, and you know the world all over, I mean, the pandemic has had its own dimension, so I don't have to explain to all of you the fact that today at least we are sitting here without masks and talking to each other. But, you know, a sense I got at that time with the way the administration came out, the way the US Congress came out, bipartisan, you know, a resolution, the way the industry came out, and of course, the diaspora. There was a sense which I picked up that whatever happens, there is a stake in India's success. Now, I would say that coming down to the defense side, and you have already elaborated there, I don't want to go in the last 10 years. I mean, from almost $0, today it stands in $20+ billion. A lot of our lift capacity, etc. There's so much of exchange happening, so many of exercises happening. Even right now, Malabar is very much, and defense foundation agreements have been done. I think the future perhaps lies in what we have often spoken about is the co-development and co-production of defense equipment. You know, we often talk about reliable supply chains, global supply chains. I think the initiatives taken in India to enhance India's capacity so as to play a strong role in the global supply chains. And I think in that, some of the projects like the light combat aircraft, where the engines are from United States, these are some examples in which we can move further. And I think it's important to look at the Japanese example, where Japan has moved in and created production capacities in India, and how much that has gone ahead. I mean, I'm only mentioning a case so that it gives that the market is huge in India, not just in defense, in a whole lot of other areas also which we'll touch. And therefore, this is an important opening. And in that, I think certainly I agree that much more needs to be done, and certainly a red carpet needs to be laid out.
And I see this as essentially the big task for the future, because the Prime Minister has very clearly conveyed his own interest in building up India's defense industrial capabilities, and India wanting to move out of the position of being constantly a purchaser of other people's equipment. So this is really an opportunity for the United States and India to construct an alternative model of engagement, and I hope we will see the benefits of that in the years to come.
I think pandemic opened all our eyes,
Yes.
including here,
Yes.
that what we talk of reliable
Yes.
supply chains.
Yes.
I think that has also triggered this, but there is a great opening for United States-India partnership in this.
Let me ask you what may be a slightly uncomfortable question, and it has to do with China in this equation. The US and India obviously have a very strong view about the kind of world order we would like to see in the Indo-Pacific. Both sides have clearly stated their commitment to a rules-based order and so on and so forth. What kind of a role can China play? Is it going to be the glue that keeps us together? Or will India have to find ways of managing its relations with China, even as it deepens its relationship with the United States? This question is often on people's minds, given the events of the last 2 years in Sino-Indian relations. How do you think about this?
I think actually one thing which both our countries and all of us, the citizens, learn in a democratic environment is to tackle and handle people who may not always agree with you. So I think in the international order too, there are global challenges today, and pandemic has been one such channel. In fact, I'll quote President Biden as saying that no one is safe till everyone is safe. I mean, how much ever you shut yourself, you have seen that COVID has entered. So today's global challenges require global responses. So I would say that the Quad, I2U2, etc., all of them are answers in that. Now, as far as China is concerned, look, China is a neighbor for India. It's not something that can be wished away. It's right next door. And my leadership has been very clear. I think there's no dearth of engagement. And you are well aware of the initiatives and which were undertaken. Even now, my minister has been very clear and very open on that, that it's important to resolve the border issue.
Yeah.
Because for whatever has happened, I think is there for everyone to see. So in order to have normal relations, there needs to be mutual respect, mutual regard, and basically all the agreements that have got us in last so many years to ensure that it was never a hot order, those needs to be respected. And as far as United States-India relationship is concerned, I mean, pardon me if I'm differing in some way, I think this relationship is moving in positive trajectory, and it's much beyond just the China factor, as many have tried to say. And that's why I touched upon some of the areas there, and I'm sure we'll get to touch upon that. And you will realize the dimension of this partnership, that even in the Quad, if you take a look at the spread of Quad, and many of the new and emerging technologies in healthcare, in so many other areas it has reached. And as I pointed out just now, new initiatives that are being taken.
Let me change the conversation slightly, but drawing on one of the themes that you talked about, which is the Indian student population in the United States, Indian scientists, Indian technologists. We have always said that we want to see India being successful. And part of the ingredients for Indian success is its very large youthful population. Now, you have overseen a quite dramatic set of initiatives with respect to education, especially joint educational partnerships, which have the huge potential of paying off in terms of this youthful population getting a world-class education at Indian prices. People don't appreciate how much money Indian middle-class parents actually spend on sending their children to the United States. It's an astronomical number. And
Ask me since I come from Punjab.
Yes, I know. and I expect that the kind of work you're doing in education is meant to address some of that demand. Can you walk us through some of the ambitions you have on that count?
So, actually, I do feel that along with IT, digital, startup, innovation space, which I'm sure we'll touch and we all know, we are much more aware of, that education and knowledge partnership is a very critical aspect of our relationship. It's not that it's new. Look, you came here years ago, my parents came here before I was born in 56, went back in 58. This has been going on. But today, I think the focus needs to be even more. Now, I know that there's so much of focus on the strategic side that many people here don't realize that India is a very young country. 50% of India's population is 28 years or below. And you also are mindful separately that many of the countries all over the world are aging. Many of the European economic powerhouses today. So look, I'm bringing in altogether a different dimension here. That this young in India can be a force of good not only just for United States and India, but also world over. We talk so much about semiconductors these days. I'm sure many of you know that semiconductor industry requires huge manpower, apart from the fabs and ecosystems. Now, I myself wouldn't have realized till the time I went on the West Coast and spoke to many of these semiconductor companies. So that's why this connect. And as I mentioned, out of 200,000 students here, 200,000 students, 2/3 are in STEM areas. Yeah. So for the first time in the Quad, we have an education initiative in STEM. So India has a new education policy under which we can work on internationalization of education in terms of establishing campus-to-campus relations, intertwining of degrees, joint research. There's so much that is possible. And I have myself spoken to more than 160 presidents and chancellors. I can tell you there is certainly a lot of excitement. And we want to enable that. We have done a number of roundtables, virtual, where we have got a line of senior Indian education authorities. And on the US side, top universities, so as that the Indian side hears what are the difficulties which the American institutions are finding.
And would it be your ambition to have American educational institutions one day be able to offer courses and degrees, either virtually or through physical campuses in India?
So, Ashley, what I would say is that in this basket, any of it adds. So, whether it's campus to campus, whether it's even tier 2, tier 3 cities in India.
Yeah.
You know, many of the multinationals here, when they move into India, they focus on metropolis.
Yeah.
They train people there. I've been encouraging them that please look at tier 2, tier 3. There are lots of young there. And perhaps if you can set up good skill development centers, these kids may be much more flexible. You know, just like here, I mean, if you are coming from Harvard or you are coming from the top institution, there is a certain mindset. I mean, there is a lot of flexibility here. I mean, let me give you an example of collaboration that is possible. You know, at the height of COVID, one day Dr. Fauci called me and said, you know, there are some strains can we get? We just want to run them against certain vaccines. So, and I know Johns Hopkins, the medical has a whole lot of collaboration. But here we are talking of even tier 2, tier 3 cities, even in improvement of syllabi. Because if I can be very candid and honest, I think the US system has cracked breaking the silos, especially between education, government, and business.
Yeah.
Whether it's MIT or it is other institutions.
Sure.
So there's a lot that can be helped in improving the syllabi, if I can say.
Yeah. Let me take this one step further, which goes into the broader structure of the partnership that we have between our two countries. One of the privileges you have in a think tank is to be able to think about the world 25, 30 years out, which policymakers don't have the luxury of thinking about. And what strikes me is that India is increasingly going to become the principal provider of services to the world. It may in time also become an alternative source of manufacturing, but certainly for the foreseeable future, services. And services are going to require some circulation of labor pools where Indians can come to the United States, work in the United States, go back if they choose to, and so on and so forth. I know in the past we've always had the challenge of US visa policies not always being flexible enough to allow this circulation of labor. How do you see this over the next decade? Because as our own population ages, as our own STEM deficits remain, we're going to be looking outside the United States for trained, skilled people to come and support our competitiveness and so on and so forth. What is your vision for how we can open doors to make this easier?
Actually, I think it's a very interesting time you have asked me this question because on the visas, because sometimes, and a lot of times, wrongly, I get banned on the social media for not helping out with US visas right now. So I say, you want an Indian visa, tell me. So there are always challenges. I think you have absolutely pointed out correctly that and this is not just restrained to United States. I recall when I was in Germany, US has been much more forthcoming in modulating its visa policies vis-a-vis what are the current requirements,
Yes.
whether it's in terms of, let's say, nurses or in terms of medical systems or et cetera, et cetera. When I was there, Germany came into, on the green card pattern, they brought out what was called an orange card. And somewhere the thinking had not gone, they only gave it to the husbands. So many people, young people would come and then they would use that as a stepping stone to come to United States or somewhere else or go back. But I think coming back to your point, it's very important and we need to see it ahead. We need to facilitate that. In fact, part of this Education Connect with India, not only it will save lots of money of many of the deserving kids who cannot afford coming here, and not only you can use virtual mechanism, you can use campus mechanisms, etc., etc. But also, if we can work in what I would say is innovative ways, many of the industry majors, and I know again I'm giving an example of Germans here. In India, when they establish their setups, in the areas where they have their factories, they also developed a small skill development center. And skilling gave them goodwill in that area, plus used some of them. And then they worked out a mechanism where for 3 to 4 years, they could take them even in the German industry wages where they had. Now, I think with the challenges which are coming, and as you have said, and skilling is going to be, it's a challenge here. And I know that number of Indian companies have taken and invested in creating of skills, particularly in STEM areas in the United States. So this challenge can only be overcome collectively and also innovatively. And visas is one area where certainly you will have to have an innovative approach.
Let me, building on that, ask you to talk about Indian contributions or US Indian contributions in 2 areas, which I think have been quite remarkable but often don't get the attention they deserve. One is in the digital/IT space, where every time I look at Silicon Valley, I see Chinese Americans and Indian Americans making huge contributions. But tell me what your experience has been in terms of the broad technology cooperation in the digital and IT space. And second, in the area of energy, because everyone thinks of energy simply in terms of what India purchases from abroad. What I'm more interested in is what are the US Indian contributions to development of new alternative energy sources, trading in new technologies, and so on and so forth. So if you can speak to both those issues.
I think both these areas are very important and significant, and especially in the current. So if I may say the IT, digital, and I'm including startup, innovation basket together because they are very closely connected. And in that now we also have the new and emerging technologies, whether it is 5G or even cybersecurity, there is huge opportunities, I would say requirements for United States and India to cooperate. It's not that it's not happening. Yes, in certain way, when you see Indian IT people on the West Coast and a number of other places, I think it points to that. But I would say much more deeper. Because as I have pointed out to you that India has a huge young population. And along with that, in the last few years, we have seen how the startup space has, from almost zero, today we have in thousands and thousands and unicorns. And in fact, I was amazed the other day, Ashley, in New York, I met this young boy from Punjab, 28 years old. And if I tell you, when he told me he's an 8th class dropout, I almost fell off my chair. And he's a millionaire. No? He's got into this IT, and so there's so many such examples. And I think this, particularly to United States and India, this is unique. The ecosystem which promotes and excites people and gives them, and this essentially comes much more in the young. And that's why I do feel that this is one area where we have a huge potential. I know that now in the last 2 years or 3 years, our NSCs are working much more closely. There are, if you look at any of our recent joint statements, you will see a clear mention, as I said, in new and emerging technologies. There are initiatives which are being taken. And also, organizations like National Science Foundation are taking a lot of initiatives. Now that brings me to your second area, energy. Again, currently even more exciting area, because I'm sure at some stage you're going to catch me on that also. 5 years ago, there was $0 of trade. Nobody could even believe that LNG could be exported between our two countries. And today, we are talking in terms of 20 billion. And LNG is an important component for India's diversification, plus moving on climate change. When I was mentioning this to Secretary Kerry almost 2 years ago, but today, Europe is saying the same thing. So, I think many different aspects in the energy basket, and there we go further to renewables. Renewables, solar, battery technology. The DFC is very excited. They already have invested in projects. And there is another angle in this, not only in India, but also in the third countries. I recall when International Solar Alliance started, we had offered almost 100 million at that time to Sri Lanka. But of course, they were diverted in other issues. So similarly, in Africa, Latin America, there's a whole lot of scope which United States and India can do. But as I pointed out, solar, battery technology, these are important. Now, further we go, hydrogen. There's a huge initiative both in the United States and India.
Green hydrogen.
And that partnership can certainly play an important role in the world.
So I'm going to ask a self-interest, well, not ask a question, but a self-interested suggestion. Please don't forget nuclear, because we did a lot of work to get civil nuclear cooperation on the rails. And I hope one day we can bring that agreement to commercial conclusion. So anything that the government of India can do.
Certainly, Ashley, not at all. And in fact, if you have been seeing world over, of course in our bilateral too, but world over, even Germany is beginning to remember nuclear. So I'm certainly hopeful and positive that things will move, and some of the things were outside our control. A lot of dependent on ownership and things like that happened. So I'm sure that will be part and parcel of it.
I'm going to open the conversation to the floor, because I'm aware of time and I want to give you a chance to address questions to the ambassador as well. So if you could just raise your hands, I'll recognize you. Please identify yourself so that the ambassador knows who you are.
Old friends should be banned. Go ahead.
Oh, that would eliminate Alan immediately. I can't do that. Alan, go ahead. Just wait for the microphone, please.
Hi, Alan Cronstadt, Congressional Research Service. Thank you, Ashley, and always a pleasure to see you, Ambassador. I wanted to dig into a topic that came up during your conversation. I think a student of history would find it difficult to come up with an example of major powers that didn't have their own robust indigenous defense industries. And I note that in 2005, I think it was, Secretary Condoleezza Rice said U.S. policy intended to help India's rise as a major power. And Ashley took the ball and created a very persuasive strategic altruism argument. Under that umbrella, in 2012, the Pentagon started the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. And I think in the last couple of years under Ash Carter as Secretary of Defense, there seemed to be a lot of energy behind that. But now 5 years later, there's not really any kind of headline success stories for that. So I'd ask you, Ambassador, if you could talk about maybe what are the obstacles there, and you kind of challenged us to pick a sector, and you'll tell us a new story. Is there a new story in this kind of technology sharing and co-production issue area?
Alan, you're talking about the DTTI in
Yeah,
particular,
DTTI.
right?
So let me again broaden my response to you, since this relates to the defense, as well as, and if you saw that in my comments, I spoke about co-production, co-development, and DTTI has played a significant role in that. Definitely the platform, but world over, countries are facing a much more difficult economic situation, where you also require to work out innovatively the financing mechanisms. And that's why I did, of course, allude to the example of the engines, which are important component of our project, the light combat aircraft. And I also drew in the example of Japan. I mean, it's not just restricted to one sector, but I mean, the example of the Maruti car in India, I think if you look back, had the Japanese not located that here, it wouldn't have. And after that, it's gone, I mean, I think multiple times. So I would say that there is a concerted effort in India right now to enhance India's capacity and capability. And and I gave even examples of new forms, how we are working together, including the US ship getting repairs done there. And MRO, again, has huge openings. So I would say that while that process continues, there are other openings also coming up. And therefore, I would much open the scope of possibilities. Wherever it works, we should innovatively go ahead.
Yes, right at the back, please.
Yes, my name is Roger Cochetti. I'm an editorial contributor on technology policy to the Hill newspaper. And my question has nothing to do with technology policy, but has to do with Diego Garcia, which is the centerpiece of the U.S. military presence in the Indian Ocean. Could you clarify or explain what the Indian perspective is towards? Obviously, there are layers of international legal issues of British sovereignty and the legality of the lease. But what is in the bigger picture? What is the Indian perspective towards a major U.S. military base in the Indian Ocean?
Are you asking me specifically about Dago Garcia or?
Either way, either the specific perspective towards Diego Garcia, or either specific or the broader perspective as you wish. I have no idea how the Indian
Because
government views the
I
subject.
myself, I'm not aware of the exact issues right now on Dago Garcia, what's happening on the negotiations with Mauritius or this thing. But broadly, I think as an approach, it's not just, we have some likely bases coming up very near us, and that is a cause of concern. So I think the perspective,
You don't mean American bases are the cause of concern.
no,
Just
I
clarify.
said, since he mentioned about bases coming up, so so I think, again, it needs to be seen in the perspective. In general, giving a comment, I don't think it's a speculative that are you in favor of bases or not in favor of bases. I think I am not competent to respond to that. However, each case specifically, with the history, with what the intentions are, and what implication it has for India's security, I think those are aspects which any country would take into account.
Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador. Asanga, Senior Fellow at the Millennium Project and former Director of the National Security Think Tank in Sri Lanka. My question is about regional instability, regional instability, which is a serious concern for India as well as United States. Sri Lanka, I mean, you have experience in Sri Lanka. So recently there was this Chinese spy ship which came to Hambantota in Sri Lanka. India warned multiple times, but Colombo did not sort of take the signal very seriously and welcomed the Chinese ship, the spy ship, to Hambantota. How do you read the present foreign policy in Sri Lanka? Thank you.
I don't know, you know better about the welcome and unwelcome part of it. I think, look, the broader aspect in Sri Lanka certainly needs to be looked into by the people of Sri Lanka. I think it's well known the situation Sri Lanka is in today, and India has extended a helping hand. Actually, in terms of, and I think it's in public domain, the President of Sri Lanka has spoken in the parliament, so I'm not talking of anything which is, so I think the people of Sri Lanka needs to take an open-eyed view about the kind of loans that were taken, whether they were economical, uneconomical, the infrastructure that has been created, is it being used? What implications Hambantota port will have on the Colombo port? These are, or let's say the Matale airport has on Colombo airport. So these are some aspects which the people in Sri Lanka have to look at it themselves. So I think right now, we have tried to help out in whatever way we can to the people of Sri Lanka. And the connection as far as, let me tell you an example of 2017. The floods came in Sri Lanka, and I was the ambassador there. I got a call from the Prime Minister, who happens to be the President now, in the evening at 6 p.m. And next day, by 7 o'clock in the morning, the Indian naval ship with supplies was there. And the Sri Lankan Navy and the Indian Navy together moved around to help people, concretely help people. So by the time the other countries arrived, and including the ones you have mentioned were welcomed, It was 3 to 4 days. So, look, this aspect of closeness and also ability and desire to help is very important.
Seema?
Ambassador, if I could ask you a big picture question. Seems to me that, Indian foreign policy looks or desires a multipolar world order. In the US, sitting in Washington, seems to me that it's increasingly a Cold War between the US and China. What kind of difficulties does that create in, aligning the India-US partnership? And my second question is about India's neighborhood. Do you think, I know we have more convergence than divergence on various countries in the neighborhood, but when you look at Afghanistan, Pakistan, maybe even Bangladesh, what is the degree, there are a lot more difficulties in terms of viewpoints, and the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan created major difficulties for India. What are some of those discussions like today? Is there alignment, let's say, on Bangladesh? Again, we have differed rather vehemently on policy issues with regard to Bangladesh. So if you could give us a sense.
So, Seema ji, I would say that, and what I mentioned in my opening comments, look, there always will be viewpoints. And even within a country, I think it's fairly open here. Even within political parties here, during elections, we see there are differing viewpoints, there are differing things. But what is important today is that we can sit across and we can discuss our viewpoints. And at end of the day, obviously, it's the national interest. But if you look at India's neighborhood, I think it's fairly clear that some of the forces which are uncomfortable with India certainly are not comfortable with the United States either. As far as the broader this thing is concerned about what do we prefer, I think the world has its own mechanism. I don't think bipolar or multipolar comes. I think there is an existing reality, and all the countries work together. But what's most important for us is to have peace and tranquility. And I think on that we have been very clear. And there are opportunities where we work together across, like for example in climate change, across different countries. But at the end of the day, for my government, development of the people of India, and in that 1.35 million is very important.
Well, on that note, I want to just reiterate something that the ambassador said in his opening remarks, which is that we have at the moment an enormous opportunity in the bilateral relationship. You went so far as to call it a sunrise, which we need to prepare for without losing sight of our larger strategic objectives. And the enemy is always complacency. And I would say we ought not to lose the capacity to talk to each other as frankly as possible, in the appropriate forums, of course. Because as you point out, we have different histories and sometimes we have different interests. but to the degree that we can keep open lines of communication. We may not always agree on each other's policies, but we at least appreciate the imperatives that drive those. And to the degree that this appreciation is acute, we can make adjustments, ideally. So we still have a lot of work to do in those areas. I just want to take the opportunity on behalf of all of you and myself to thank you for making the time and spend this afternoon here with us. I hope we will have more opportunities to do so. And I simply want to say that you are always welcome to the Carnegie Endowment in whatever avatar you choose to come. So let me wish you also well for the holidays. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Ashley. And, when I came in my first stint here, I used to live at a hotel here called Howard Johnson. I don't know if it's still called. And every day I would walk down to my embassy and I would cross Carnegie. And I would look at it, had I not joined the service, perhaps in my School of International Studies of TAR, maybe I would have got a chance to come here. So you are in something which perhaps I would have aspired. So always a pleasure to be with you here, and I look forward in whenever the next opportunity arrives. And as always, I think something which I've learned here, that we have platforms where we can have a frank exchange.
Absolutely.
And maybe sometimes not so much in public, but always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you. I look forward to seeing you all again at some point back at the endowment. So thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thanks so much, Taranjit.
Thank you.
That was great. Not at all. I thought that was great.
I hope it went okay.